Los Angeles and being acquitted, and then the moment that the cable news that was then coming up, like Fox and CNN and this cable news with its permanently buzzing helicopters and its news coverage on the second, even if nothing is happening, then they'll cover how it is not happening and what might happen all the time, 24 hours a day. And then, of course, there's the footage shot by a private person with his own video camera, sending it to a news, etc. This kind of frenzy of news and copying news and keeping on telling the news even if there is no news. This resulted in one of the worst urban riots ever. The entire south central of Los Angeles erupting in violence. This is our attempt this is the backdrop of one of the worst incidents. A guy trying to pass, because interesting here in this kind of non-place Los Angeles that has no centers, etc. Where do you, if you want to fight and destroy things, where do you go? You know, you're standing in the. It's like this kind of hesitation that you feel when you have to park your car in a completely empty parking place. So where do you go? Where do you start beating people up or setting fire to Korean shops, or where? So always the corner, always the street corner. So so there was this kind of massing, this typical massing of violent people on the street corner, trying to stop traffic. Also interesting that stopping traffic, stopping the flow of things became one of the big things. And there was this guy with a truck and he wanted to kind of pass through it anyway. So they dragged him out of the car and started throwing big blocks of concrete on his head. Somebody else saw it on television and he said, hey, that's around the corner. Runs out of his house and starts freeing up and starts liberating this guy. And so it's a very, very strange kind of rioting because of the role of TV in it. It's part real, part unreal. And then, of course, the last one is where it all begins. Well, where our journey began. It's the French riots. It all started Clichy-sous-Bois here. Two boys, Zied and Bouna, 17, I think 16 or 17 years old. They walk through the area. All of a sudden, a police car sees them. The police car switches on its sirens because they see two people walking on the street. The boys start running because they know that whatever they have done or not, the police will treat them as criminals. They run from the police, lock themselves up, find an open door somewhere in a kind of electricity house, go inside there, and then are electrocuted because it's a transformator. How do you call those things? Transformatorhuisje in Dutch. Thing with lots of electricity. Then, well, it's all then what happens is predictable. The whole Clichy-sous-Bois area erupts in violence. These boys, they SMS, or they text, or they phone, or they create internet sites. And then it kind of becomes this huge sausage of interconnected council estates around Paris. And then from there, all the other high-rise estates get affected. And then, of course, from there, these are some of these websites. Banlieue 92, that's, of course, the French one, the Parisian one. And then this happens. So it's also here, it's media, but then not so much the media, the commercial media that cause it, but here the media are a tool of now how do I choose a politically neutral term? Of the rioters or the insurrectionists or the revolutionaries themselves. One of the best photographed riots ever. And then, of course, it brings this guy to power. Because urban violence will always be in someone's interest. And he was the guy who said, we will wipe away, kercherize. Kercher, that's a German brand of high-pressure water spout, something that you clean things with. In French, it's used for we will hose them away, kercherize. And he said we will kercherize them, this racaille, this scum. So he was very clear in which words he used. And because of this enormous fear of the banlieue, this enormous fear of youth and of violence, this person then comes to power. And then the first thing he does, he said, we have to solve this urban problem. The urban problem is the biggest problem of our society, of our republic, has always been able to, etc., blah, blah, blah. So he stands in the center of architecture and he talks to these guys. I find this one of the most ridiculous episodes in the history of architecture ever. You have Tom Maine, Rem Koolhaas, Christian de Porzampark, Jean Nouvel, Sir Norman Foster and Zaha Hadid. And Nicolas Sarkozy telling them we have to solve the urban problem. And then they get sent back home. And then he brings in another battery of very famous architects, well, slightly less famous architects. There's Christian de Porzampark again. There's Winnie Maas. There's Roland Castor. This is kind of the B list. And then these guys get the job, and they create these gigantic plans for Paris. Visionary plans, huge plans that deal with ecology and rivers and houses and miles and miles and miles and miles of brilliant architecture. And the interesting thing is that at the same time, we can ask ourselves, is the circle now complete? You know, that's one of the questions I'd like to think about. The very last lecture is by far the least formed. It will be about, because there are basically these two options, I want to keep them both open. Or I want to treat them more or less parallel. The role of architecture, if there is such a thing, the role of politics, how does that all work? What is everyone's agenda here? From which point of view are we all thinking and working here? But the last one, I will talk about something that I find particularly interesting and difficult to understand. And it's a kind of, you could say, if there is such a word, the scientificization of space. It's the fact that this urban problem in the last 60, 70 years has led to a number of scientific disciplines, some of them also represented at this university or at this faculty even, a kind of science of social behavior in space. It could be environmental psychology, it could be spatial or social geography, etc. There has been, since the 1950s, you could say in parallel with this rise of science fiction, with this rise of urban violence, with this problem of what do we do with people who live in this planned environment, also a rise of attempts at making this into a predictable science, that you can actually prove and predict if you build something like this, people will behave like that. So, for example, there has been criminology, the criminology and its relationship to space, to architecture. This is, for example, a research by a Dutch guy on the spatial behavior of burglars. What kind of architecture and streets or typologies do burglars really like? And you see, semi-detached is semi-detached house. Detached house, low-rise flats, terraced, high-rise, etc. So it shows, I think, that somewhere here, terraced and high-rise, that's where they have, I don't know, I never know how to read this stuff. I'm not a scientist. But anyway, it means that burglars prefer high-rise. Because there are less people to watch over them, it's more anonymous, etc. Out of this came a whole kind of, does urban layout affect the pattern of urban crime? Also research done in British new towns. Burglary in dwellings shown by red dots. It's also interesting, all these insurance companies have created such a fantastic amount of data that everyone can use to tell whatever they want with. So here, for example, is a page from the book by Oscar Newman, very famous architect and researcher, sociologist from the school of Jane Jacobs, you remember from the beginning, and he created this idea called crime prevention by urban design, by urban planning or by urban design. And he created an entire science proving that why this creates many more opportunities for crime than that, because of defensible space. It's a cliche that everybody, or a cliche, it's a real word being used also now by police officers in the Netherlands. You can get a kind of mark on your door that that your house or your environment or your street is more safe for burglary because of a number of measures that have been taken. And it is not just about putting locks on your door, it's about, for example, not having a hedge so high in front of your door that somebody could get in and start working at your door without being seen from the street, etc. But then it also on a larger scale, there's a whole science of defensible space that is now being used by consultancies, it's an industry. And it's all based on a kind of social, urban critique of the 60s. Here, for example, this is one of the researches by Oscar Newman called the fear map. By interviewing all the people in this area, it's kind of, you would say it's kind of a leading question, asking people, on your little walk with your dog or to the bakery, which parts are you most afraid? Where's the most fear? And out of these interviews, these kind of spatial interviews, come fear maps. Fear maps can then be turned into advice, consultancy to change an area. And then, for example, what you see before can be turned in after. So this is, even if you jump over it or step over it like that, this is crucial, absolutely crucial. Because it shows it's who it belongs to. So if somebody steps over it, just like that, maybe another neighbor would think, that's not okay, and he might call the police. Of course, whether that person is black or white would have absolutely nothing to do with it. But so there's a whole science of defensible space that we can see here, and it's being taught here at school for real. So you can come to this lecture and see it being completely ridiculized, and then go to another lecture and you can learn it. And one of the most, and I'll leave you with this, one of the most fascinating stories I know of is by the famous rat experiment by John Calhoun. He was an ethologist. Ethologist is somebody who studies the behavior of animals. You Dutch people know one other ethologist, it's Maarten het Hart. But this is the ethologist John Calhoun, who studied the effect of overcrowding on the behavior of rats. So what he did is he created what he called Rat City. Rat City is a big box. Here you see a model of it. And this box, this environment, gives everything that the rats need. It gives them housing, it gives them food, warmth, water. Their shit and urine is being cleaned up. So it takes care of everything. Meaning that the rats can also start breeding like crazy because they get everything and they don't have to work for it anymore. you're getting where I'm going. So the rats